Dave motherfucking Chappelle in a segment I like to call Goats Doing Goat Shit. Dave Chappelle, the stand-up comedian, is arguably the best comic working today, and even arguably one of the best comics of all time. He's definitely up there on my Mount Rushmore. And I just want to make sure that as creatives, we all give this man his flowers for pulling off something amazing. Pulling off something that, although everybody recognizes as amazing, is, in my opinion, paradigm shifting. Ripples of him taking this action, which I'm about to break down in a bit, will be seen and recognized for years and years and years to come. Not for all, and maybe not even for most, but generally speaking, the way creatives do business with these large multi-million-dollar conglomerate corporations can be different, should be viewed differently. There are alternatives to signing your life away and all of your rights and your name and your likeness and your IP. And as true as it is in the, like TV, film, entertainment space, it's true within the music space and like signing to a major label, signing away your ownership, your masters, your IP for a quote unquote substantial advance. It's the same within the indie writing space with signing away your ownership, your IP to a book, to a story you've written, to a major publisher, etc. There are alternatives. So what am I talking about? All right. So for those of you unfamiliar, Dave Chappelle, together with fellow stand-up comedian Neil Brennan and writer Neil Brennan, co-created the iconic sketch comedy show known as The Chappelle Show. Now, other sketch comedy shows existed, obviously, before and since. Notably, like SNL is like one of those like legacy comedy shows that, although content-wise, it's kind of like hit or miss, but it's just been on the air forever. You have more, or other shows rather, that had less of a run, like probably like a 4 or 5 year run with like Mad TV or In Living Color, to help birth the careers of folks like Jim Carrey or a lot of the Wayans, because it was created, I believe, by Keenan. Then you have Mad TV that had folks come out of there like Bobby Lee and Brian Callen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Chappelle Show was a sketch comedy show that only lasted 2 seasons. But pound for pound, up against any other sketch comedy show, including SNL, including In Living Color, including Mad TV, is widely regarded within comedy circles as the best sketch comedy show ever. Now, you might fall on either side of that belief, and that's fine, obviously. What I will say is the Clayton Bigsby sketch, which if you haven't seen it, I'm going to link to it in the episode notes for you to check it out. But it is by far the funniest, illest, cleverest, best comedy sketch ever in history, period. That's my opinion. And that's from the Chappelle Show. And the reason this show stopped was because Dave Chappelle literally walked away from it. You can look up several interviews with him detailing after he came back, why he went away in the first place. And a lot of folks, wrote him off as crazy. You might know the story that, he left $50 million on the table that was offered to him, not attached along with his ownership and licensing, by the way. That's very important. Walked away from that $50 million deal and went to Africa, and people said, he's crazy, lost his mind. Who would do that? And I'll tell you who. Goats do that. Integrity does that. Folks that know what's right and what's wrong do that. Money isn't a factor in those situations. Shouldn't be a factor in those situations. And he's made it back in spades since. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So he walks away from the show, citing, creative differences and, the fact that he didn't have ownership to the show, because he did sign one of these, in my opinion, unscrupulous contracts that exist, again, in the book publishing industry, television industry, music industry, all across the board. It's corporations doing corporation shit. As I've said before on this show, it is the mandate of a corporation to increase shareholder returns quarter after quarter, period. Can't even blame them for it. It's the structure. It's how they're set up. That's what they do. That's what they do. That's what they are programmed and literally are supposed to do. So they lock folks into contracts. that literally write off their rights to something that they themselves created, their name, their likeness, in perpetuity, meaning forever. Shout out to Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, which ingrained that term in my mind. But they'll have verbiage like that within contracts and say things like throughout the universe. Literally. Like we own, it's like my book Fractal. If I signed one of these contracts to one of the big 5 book publishers like Penguin Random House or HarperCollins, Simon Schuster, etc., because they waived like a big, $500,000 or $1 million, upfront advance or whatever. And I got gassed off that and then signed a contract for the book. In that contract, standard would be we, insert name of top 5 publishing house, own the rights and likeness to this book in perpetuity throughout the entire universe. And they'll even get sneaker on like the book publishing side of contracts. And I'm sure there's their versions of within like the music industry and television and film, etc. But in book publishing contracts, they'll have things like, oh, no, you own the rights to your book. That's fine. But we own the rights to the audiobook version forever. Or separately, we own the rights to the digital applications and the rights to your book in those spaces like Kindle and iBooks, etc. So you really got to be wary about shit like that. And focus not on the money being offered to you, although that comes into play, but as in my opinion, secondary thing. Focus on the retention of rights being offered to you, or in essence that you're offering to them because you own the rights as of now, right? Before signing any contract. So if anything, you're offering them pieces of that or licensing that to them in an ideal situation. And this, by the way, is coming from someone who has not been offered a book deal. Who knows, when the time comes, I might sign my rights away along with the rights to my 2 kids or some shit like that. Nah, let me stop. All right. In all seriousness, though, Dave Chappelle signed one of these contracts where he signed his rights away to his show that he created. And he did so in his 20s, not knowing what a lot of this verbiage within the contract meant. And it's a common story, right? And folks around him tell him, oh, yeah, it's a good contract, sign it. It'll be good for you, and you're going to get X amount of dollars. And it's a common story that we hear time and time again, right? Most prevalently, I believe, like within the music industry, where, we hear about an artist that gets like $1 million signing advance or bonus, and, they're like, woohoo, I'm a millionaire. And then, fast forward a couple months and they're broke, or they owe money because they don't break down that million. All right. For 400,000 of it, taxes. So you're left with 600,000. It's not really a million. Then your manager, which gets 20%, got 200,000. So that's 600,000. It's really 400,000. Then, the cost for production and for shooting music videos and stuff like this all comes from your advance, because that's your product that they're paying for, right? They're not paying for that for you. That's coming out of your advance. So from that quote unquote $1 million, you're really left with a couple $100,000. And, you bought a car, you bought a house and stuff like that. Now you owe money. And again, that all ties into what's in these contracts and how folks sign away their ownership. So Dave Chappelle, in a piece that he put out called Unforgiven, breaks down this situation. And it's a small piece. I'll link to it in the episode notes. It's like 12 or 14 minutes long, something like that. He breaks this all down. So you guys can check that out. And, he's been good since, he came back after his hiatus over a decade, was like almost immediately recognized as the GOAT when he came back, didn't miss a step in terms of stand-up comedy, got I think $60 million deal with Netflix to put a few specials. And then the Chappelle Show starts coming back and it's put on Netflix. It's sold by or licensed by Comedy Central to Netflix, HBO. And again, they own it. They own that show due to the contract that Dave Chappelle himself signed. So they're just doing what they do. They're making money off of a piece of intellectual property that they own. As unscrupulously as it is for them to, in the way that they obtain the show and the rights to it, they're doing what is technically in their rights to do legally. So let's leave morality to the side for a second. We'll come back to that in a bit. What Dave Chappelle did in this piece, Unforgiven, asks the folks that were streaming the Chappelle Show on all these platforms to stop doing so, to boycott it, because of the uncouth business practices that resulted in Comedy Central owning something that he and Neil Brennan created and are not seeing a dime from. And you know what happened? Folks listened. People stopped fucking with the show. And as explained in the second piece that he put out called Redemption Song, which is about 10 minutes long, and I'll also link to it in the episode notes for you guys to check it out, he explains the aftermath of that ask. So he asks folks to stop streaming the show, explains to them why, people oblige, and he also had a conversation with Ted Sarandos, which is the co-CEO and the CCO of Netflix, which is where he has his current comedy deal for stand-up comedy specials. And Ted Sarandos, to his credit, agreed to remove the show from Netflix's platform. Now, in my opinion, 100% opinion, there's no fact behind this, but this is just my speculation and opinion, is Ted Sarandos some sort of hero for doing so? Probably not. It was a good, admirable thing. I'm sure it wasn't just his decision alone. Again, you know, CEOs and CCOs are balanced out by a board of directors, and different folks have different levels of say depending on their share ownership and their voting rights, etc. And I'm sure that part of the math of making that decision was taking into account the power that they saw Dave Chappelle has with his audience and the fact that he has an ongoing deal with Netflix. So let's keep one of our top guys happy type of thing. But nonetheless, it was an admirable thing for Netflix as a company to decide to do. Now, the most shocking thing, and I think this individual would deserve more credit, is Chris McCarthy, an executive over at CBS Viacom, the parent company of Comedy Central, who's the president of the Entertainment and Youth Brands division of Viacom, agreed to give Dave Chappelle his likeness back, his name back, his license back, his ownership for his creation back. I personally haven't heard of Chris McCarthy prior to this event, but according to folks like Charlemagne, whose voice within the space I respect and has worked with Chris McCarthy in the past, says that he has a track record of erring on the side of the creative. And that, to me, is the dope paradigm shifting piece of this entire situation. And that, to me, is amazing to see. So remember, don't sign your rights away. Don't sign away your ownership. Don't sign away your IP. Bet on yourself, keep all that stuff, and accept less money for services like distribution and marketing, etc., etc. You know, an example of that really brings this point home for me is the dude that did the voice of Simba in the original Lion King movie. And not even the regular voice, the singing voice. So, like Simba from the original Lion King had, you know, the Jonathan Taylor Thomas who did the voice of the young Simba before he grew up. Then after he grew up, it was some other guy did the voice, which was actually the guy Steve from, what was it, Family, the show with Michelle and Full House. Steve, which was the boyfriend of DJ in Full House, he did the voice of Simba when Simba was older. And he also did the voice of Aladdin, if I'm not mistaken. The singing voice of Simba was played by, I forget his name, but he was the older brother of TJ from the show Smart Guy. Did you guys follow all that? That web of fucking historic TGIF sitcom stars? Anyway, my point is this. He said in an interview, in a Vlad TV interview, if I'm not mistaken, that, you know, he was a kid, he, you know, didn't know much, but, you know, his mom at the time, you know, when they were going on auditions and stuff and trying to get gigs, he and his mom were offered for that role of Simba, for the singing part, I think it was something like $2 million outright, or $200,000 and points on the movie, like back end points. If the movie does good, you make more. And it's like a royalty deal. It's like a forever royalty thing. So you get much less upfront, $200,000 versus $2 million, but you have that royalty deal attached. His mother had the foresight of thinking, wait a second, this is like a Disney property. You know, Disney's a company that's been around forever. They always have these, 10-year anniversaries of Bambi and 25-year and 50-year anniversary, and they, rehash shit all the time. If this goes, which it did, if it blows up, those points are going to be worth a lot more than even the $2 million that are being offered up front, which was the case. And, he didn't disclose how much in the interview, but he said they've made way more than the $2 million offer initially up front. And that could go both ways, right? If the movie flopped, never made anything, he made $200,000 instead of $2 million that he could have made. Me personally, again, either keep the ownership, keep the royalty deals, keep the points, renegotiate anything that has to do with you giving up ownership, you giving up creative control, you giving up IP to a deal with lesser money, but retention of full rights. That's just my opinion. And again, take that with a grain of salt because, again, it's coming from a guy who has not been offered any major deals. No book deals from the big 5 publishers, not even from an imprint. No exclusive Spotify deals for this podcast. No major movie deal or TV show deal for any of the stories that I've written. Nothing. But that would be my intent if the opportunity arose. That would definitely be my game plan. Anyway, hats off to Dave Chappelle. Goats doing goat shit.